Okay, so let's go ahead and start the process of setting up our controls here, our clavicle controls. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to want to do, just like we always do, is first we should probably rename. All right, so this mirrored clavicle, we want to make sure that we keep that neat and tidy and rename that right clavicle. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and group this guy. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and group the right side as well. Okay, so we're not going to be setting up any set-driven keys or anything on these controls. And right now we don't have anything that I can imagine that we would need an extra group on top of these to be able to get the control that we want. So I'm just going to group them once. Okay. Um, and the next thing that we have to do is we have to tie that control into the joint itself. So let me go ahead and turn off my polygons here so we can see. Okay, so I'm going to select my left clavicle control. I'm going to shift select my left clavicle, make sure I turn on joint selection again. And I'm going to go to constrain, orient constraint. Okay, so I should be able to rotate my clavicle up and down, which is good. Let me go ahead and do that with my other side real quick. Again, always testing, making sure that the functionality is the same. Okay, so next thing we want to do is how are we going to make these controls follow? So previously we've been doing and building things like parent constraints, but what that's going to do, so let me go ahead and give an example of what this might look like. So if I select my clavicle, I'm not going to constrain it to my shoulder control. I'm going to constrain it to the shoulder group above it. Okay. So let me go to constrain parent constraint. All right, now let's rotate this clavicle and see what happens. Okay, so what it's doing is it is moving. It's moving our entire arm, which maybe isn't bad. And if we wanted to, we could set up much like our IK-FK switch. We could probably have a parent constraint and a point constraint, or an orient constraint and a point constraint, and give the animator an option to blend between those. So maybe there's a situation where we want that clavicle to move the entire arm. But what I really want is I want this character to be able to shrug. I want just that shoulder to be able to pivot up and down, and the arm, elbow, wrist, and all those things aren't going to follow along with it. Okay, so the parent constraint isn't going to get that done for us. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that parent constraint that I made. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to build a point constraint. Okay, so the same way that we attached our shoulder joints to that clavicle joint so that they would follow up and down. So when I rotate this, right, the arm is moving, but only in this up direction, right? So let me go ahead and rotate this down. We can probably see this just a little bit better. Okay, so we can very clearly see the shrug happening here. So we need that same action to happen when these controls are following. Okay, so I'm going to grab my clavicle. Again, I'm going to grab my left shoulder FK control group. And instead of a parent, I'm going to build a point constraint. Okay, so now when I rotate, oh, aha! So, my apologies. This control, it's not the control that we're building the constraint to. So what a point constraint does is it's going to say as an object moves in X, Y, or Z, so up, down, left, right, forward, back, that something else is going to follow in that direction. Now when we're rotating the clavicle, the joint is moving, but this is simply rotating around its pivot point. So it's not actually moving in X, Y, or Z. Now if I grabbed it and moved it around, you're going to see those controls follow. Okay, so that setup's not going to work for us either, and that's okay. So, delete that constraint. Things are working okay. So what we do want to do is we're going to use our clavicle 02 joint again. So the same one that our shoulders are constrained to, we're going to strain our controls to that guy. Okay, so I'm going to select that joint here at the end. I'm going to select my, make sure we get the right group here, left shoulder control group. And let's try to rebuild that point constraint. Okay, so now as I rotate this shoulder, what should happen is that shoulder bone rises, that our controls are also following its translation position. So we can rotate them forward, backwards, down. Good. Okay, now the one thing that I am noticing here is that my hand controls aren't actually following my elbow here on the left side. So I must have deleted earlier in the videos, excuse me, one of my constraints that I had going here. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to figure that out. So I'm going to check out my group here, try to analyze this a little bit. So I've got a point constraint for that group. I've also got an orient constraint. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and delete both of those. Okay, I'm going to rotate, see what's going on. Alright, so I'm going to take my control. Well, first I'm going to select my elbow. I'm then going to select my control group, and let's do an orient constraint. Alright, so those are going to move again, and then I'm going to select this guy here, and create my point constraint. Okay. So not 100% sure what happened. My constraints were no longer working, so I just deleted both of them and rebuilt them. So we should be good to go over here. Okay, so with that figured out, let's go ahead and make sure we get this other side taken care of as well. Okay, so again, I'm going to select my clavicle 02 on the right side. I'm going to select my shoulder FK control group. Okay, and I'm going to constrain point. Okay, so last part of this setup here is when I rotate my topmost spine control. Okay, I want these clavicles to go ahead and move along with it. Alright, and right now they are not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the group, the clavicle control group. Let me first select the, our spine 04 control. I'm going to select the left clavicle control group, and here I'm going to build a parent constraint. And then I'm going to do the same with the right clavicle control group. So select my upper spine first, spine 04, then select the clavicle control group and build a parent constraint. And now when I rotate, my clavicle should move along with it. My arm should move along with it. And let's go ahead and check our base here. Okay, so these guys are also going to move along with it. And everything looks like it's working okay. Okay, so again, our shoulder controls are point constrained to our clavicle bone so that they move along with it. Our clavicles are orient constrained to the actual control so that when you rotate them, these are going to rotate. And our clavicle control groups are parent constrained to our topmost spine control so that when we rotate the chest and that top spine joint, that those controls are going to go ahead and move along with it. Okay, so we should be good to go. We should be ready to take this to the next step. So when we come back, we are going to start selecting our joints, and we are going to skin it to our mesh.